What's up, friends? Welcome to Web3 Academy, a place for entrepreneurs, creators, and marketers to explore and learn how to use Web3 to transform business models and create thriving communities. Enjoy this next episode. Hey, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Web3 Academy podcast. Today is a deep dive with myself, Kyle Reidhead, and we are talking about why the Ethereum Merge is so important for Web3. I've been talking about this merge for a long time. And if you've been in this space, you've been hearing about the merge for a long time. And it looks like it is finally here. And I'm going to dive into some of those details and explain what this really means for the Web3 ecosystem, because it's bigger than just the Ethereum merge happening and getting off of proof of work. There's a lot of things that will reverberate throughout the Web3 ecosystem. And I just want to explain that so you are aware. Now, before I do, if you want to learn more about Web3 and more about just blockchain in general, I know this stuff can be somewhat challenging and difficult to understand. That's why I created the Web3 Rabbit Hole course. So I highly recommend you check that out because it goes into detail of what Web3 is, goes into detail of the underlying technology like blockchain and how this all kind of works and functions and what's present in the ecosystem and sort of where it's going, and then looks at the application layer and kind of how that's going to emerge in the future. So if you're looking to build in the space, invest in the space, use the space, or just playing around or trying to learn, the Web3 Rabbit Hole course is a great tool for you to learn and understand. At the end, when you complete it, you also get to mint yourself an NFT, which proves that you have completed the course. So that is really, really cool. And then finally, before I get into this, if you're not signed up for our newsletter, just check out the show notes below and you can do so. All you gotta do is throw in your email and we will email you all of the podcasts that we do and our deep dives, our spotlight interviews, and our news roll up every single week so that you have it in your inbox and can get it immediately. But otherwise, let's dive into Ethereum Merge because, friends, this is a big deal. So we're going to read the article that I just wrote. The Ethereum Merge is happening. And seriously, it's actually happening this time. The date is September 15th or 16th, depending on the block of 2022. This is now the consensus date amongst the Ethereum core developers working on the Ethereum Merge. We just had the final testnet Goerli merge on August the 10th, I believe it was. So it seems that ETH 2.0 is finally here, barring, of course, no heavy technical issues that may arise over the coming weeks. So the Ethereum merge from proof of work to proof of stake is really a technological feat of very large proportion. It will have significant impacts across crypto and the Web3 ecosystem at large. And so in this episode here, I'm going to explain what the Ethereum Merge is and break down the 3 reasons why it will have such a massive impact on Web3. Real quick, the TLDR is that 1, Web3 goes green and becomes available to businesses around the world. 2, we have improved security and number go up technology. Talk a little bit about what that means. And 3, and many have not heard this one, but the internet bond is born. Okay, we'll dive into what that is, of course. So all of this happens with the flip of a switch in about less than 1 month, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. It's time to buckle up and get ready for the next phase of Web3. So what is the Ethereum Merge, or ETH 2.0 as it used to be called, is no longer called that. The Ethereum Merge is simply a transition of how the blockchain validates transactions. Okay, so it's moving from proof of work over to proof of stake. Now, the details on how all this works isn't really necessary to understand the implications that this has on Web3, but I'm going to give a quick summary anyway, just so you're in the know. So proof of work consensus is where large mining equipment around the world is used to solve mathematical equations and then compete to verify transactions. So those who solves those mathematical equations, they're in a race, and whoever does it is able to verify these transactions and mine new Bitcoin. Now, while this can be great for a form of consensus to ensure decentralization, it does require a lot of electricity, a lot of equipment, and a lot of resources in order to actually do this, right? Whereas proof of stake consensus is where participants stake a certain amount of crypto. In this case, with Ethereum, it's ETH. And they are selected randomly to validate the transaction. So there is no competition here. Now, this mechanism, as a result of there not being competition or needing to solve any mathematical equations, this mechanism requires basically no energy and can be performed on a regular laptop or potentially even a phone, okay? So the move from proof of work to proof of stake has vast implications in terms of the following. One, lowering the expenses the blockchain incurs to pay for security. Okay, we actually did a podcast with Sam about this, all about kind of blockchain revenues and expenses and profitability of blockchains. So just talking about how security is an expense of a blockchain. I'm not sure what number that is, but if you just scroll down our list here in our podcast or on YouTube, depending on where you're listening or watching, you'll find that podcast. And you can learn about revenues and expenses of blockchains. So the second thing that moving from proof of work to proof of stake does is it decreases the energy and resources required for someone to participate in validating transactions. Okay, so if you want to validate transactions on proof of work, you need to buy this big equipment. You got to set up something where you're going to have all this energy. Oftentimes, this is done somewhere remote. Whereas when you go to proof of stake, you can just stake it with a computer, and you can do it from your home. And finally, this will improve the security and prevention of bad actors, which may look to attack the blockchain. Now, one thing that's important to note here, the Ethereum Merge will have little to no impact on gas fees, okay? You frequently see this on Twitter and other areas. That is not true. The purpose of the Ethereum Merge is not to impact gas fees whatsoever. But please understand there are alternative projects underway at the same time in the Ethereum roadmap, which are looking to lower gas fees in the future. I'm going to take it one step further than what I've written in the article here, since we're just listening on the podcast. The Ethereum layer 1 or mainnet will never have low gas fees. That's not really the purpose of the layer 1. That is the purpose of all these layer 2s that we talk about a lot on this podcast. Things like Optimism, Arbitrum, Immutable, and so on and so forth, ZKs. The purpose of the Ethereum L1 is to be the consensus layer, which is just to be as secure and decentralized as possible. That's why we're moving to proof of stake, because it allows us to be the most secure and the most decentralized. I guess also there's a lot of debate on what is more secure and more decentralized, proof of work, proof of stake. If you are talking to OGs in the space who have not kept up with the research, they will tell you proof of work, but basically all the research these days supports proof of stake so long as it's done properly and you give it enough time. So hopefully all those things will get rid of some confusion of things you might see in the space. So let's first discuss the implications of the merge in regards to the environment. I talked a little bit about how it's going to reduce the energy. So the Ethereum energy requirements. The Ethereum merge lowers the crypto's carbon footprint, okay? So in case you haven't heard, crypto has a bad reputation when it comes to energy usage and carbon footprint. Now, Bitcoin tends to be at the front and center of this criticism as the leader of proof of work blockchains. However, Ethereum in its current state also finds itself in the same or similar spotlight. Now, before I go further, I think it's also important to highlight that most of these criticisms are false and are significantly exaggerated, especially when you compare the energy usage of crypto to other industries. So Bitcoin gets a lot of flack about this, and you know, it does use a lot of energy, but the one thing to understand is there are a lot of industries and a lot of technologies that use a lot of energy. What you need to compare is not how much energy it's using, it's what's the importance of this technology versus the energy that it's using. And also, is it using bad energy or is it using renewable resources, right? And so first of all, I have this picture up on the screen here for those that are watching. And it's basically comparing carbon emissions of Bitcoin compared to other industries. The number here of Bitcoin is 41 metric tons of CO2. Okay, I'm not sure if that's per year or what that is exactly, but it is a number that we can take a reference off of. I believe it's all of 2021, 41 metric tons of CO2. If we look at the gold industry, another form of money or store of like value, store of value, it is 122 metric tons of CO2. So almost triple what Bitcoin is, actually more than triple. Then you have the entire global banking system, 130 metric tons of CO2. The aviation industry, 1,982 metric tons of CO2. It has air conditioners and electric fans, 984 metric tons. Data centers, 100 metric tons. Tumble dryers, 53. So there's so many industries that, you know, may not be even as important as what Bitcoin supports, or the Web3 overall industry supports, and they use way more metric tons. So like, is it that bad? I mean, of course, we still want to try to keep our carbon footprint as down as much as possible. So again, proof of stake does allow that. I just want to make sure people understand, you know, it's not as bad as the media will have you believe. Now, anyway, regardless of the numbers, the narrative and story will always outweigh the reality, right? So this is something that needs to be addressed regardless. And as a smart contract platform, Ethereum's goal is to become a consensus layer for the internet, enabling global finance, business, and commerce to be built on top of it and to integrate into it, right? But with a heavy carbon footprint, many companies are unable to use the technology due to government mandates and restrictions, especially in places like Europe and others that have these sort of more strict mandates. Right. So in addition, there's also gaming and other communities have been vocally against the energy usage required to power NFTs and other digital assets. So it just doesn't look good, regardless of what the facts are. And so while there are many other smart contract platforms in Web3, which are already proof of stake and require little energy to use, basically all the other ones other than Ethereum, in fact, the fact is that Ethereum remains the largest smart contract platform in crypto and Web3 by a long shot. Okay, so when you were looking at the number of developers, the number of projects, the number of transactions and volume that's on Ethereum versus all these others, the number of users, etc., the number of assets, there's just nothing even remotely close to Ethereum. And so this means that if Ethereum is not a clean technology, then ultimately Web3 is not a clean technology either, which stifles adoption and growth in Web3. You got to understand that all the biggest companies in the world that are integrating into into Web3 are currently doing it on Ethereum. And there are many that are held out because they are worried about the carbon footprint, right? So we need Ethereum to go green if we want Web3 adoption. So here's the good news. Ethereum's transition from proof of work to proof of stake will lower the energy consumption of Ethereum and ultimately Web3 by 99.9%. So that is huge. It basically makes it no longer a conversation, right? Because once we go proof of stake, it is all gone. And so this is the end of NFTs, Web3, and crypto are bad for the environment story. It stops it in its tracks and enables any business moving forward to participate in Web3. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Bitcoin. However, that is another topic for another day. The good news is, however, is that this squashes it for Web3. And that, my friends, is very, very exciting. Next up, out of these top 3 things that Ethereum Merge will do for Web3, the Ethereum Merge improves its tokenomics and security. So in this industry, we all love number go up, right? Well, the Ethereum core dev team does too. This is why a big part of the ETH Merge is to improve the tokenomics of ETH, the asset, enabling its price to more easily rise. Doesn't mean it will rise, and this is not financial advice, but you can alter tokenomics and make things happen in a certain way that will allow it to rise more easily. And I'll explain what that is in just a second. Now, the Ethereum core dev team isn't worried about the price of ETH because they want their bags to grow, okay? They want this because it means more secure and anti-fragile blockchain, okay? You see, the higher the price of ETH, the harder it is for bad actors to perform a 51% attack on the blockchain. The more control someone has over the total supply of the tokens, if you're in proof of stake, the more control they could have over the network itself. Thus, the higher we can make the price of ETH, the more resources, basically what I mean here is money, someone would need to buy up control of the network, okay? So it's really important here. Now, before I break down how the merge will impact the tokenomics of ETH, it's first important to understand that the price of any asset is determined by its supply, okay? So how many tokens or how much of that asset is available, and it's demand. How many people actually want to buy that or give money for that thing, right? If you have more buyers than sellers of any asset in the world, this is true of stocks, gold, oil, a burger, like whatever it is, if you have more buyers than sellers, that price is going to go up. If you have more sellers than buyers, the price is going to go down. It's very, very simple, right? And so it gets more complicated when you look at, well, why are people wanting to buy this? What is the demand? Is there real utility? Is it a speculative asset? How much of that supply, is that supply growing, shrinking? All these kind of things really matter, right? And this is what makes the price of everything we have a market on: gold, equities, crypto, etc. So here is how the merge will impact supply and demand of ETH, right? So the merge will reduce the yearly ETH issuance, otherwise known as inflation, from 4.3% to 0.43%. So basically what happens is there is inflation of ETH, just like there is of BTC and Bitcoin. And that inflation is just creating new Bitcoins or new ETH, if we're talking Ethereum, to pay those who are validating the network. Right now, that is miners, right? But with proof of stake, it requires much less issuance of ETH than proof of work to pay for its security. So much so that issuance is reduced by over 90%. Okay, this is a massive supply shock to the ETH token supply. It goes from growing its supply 4.3% every year down to 0.43%. Okay, that is a huge supply shock. Now, that's only one aspect. There's much more. The overhead costs of validating Ethereum falls close to zero. Okay, so to validate Ethereum in proof of work, it requires significant energy costs and expensive mining rigs. This means that the validators or the miners are selling a large share of their ETH that they earn by securing the network. So that 4.3% that is being put out to miners, it's an estimate that at least 70% of that is being sold to pay for energy costs and to update their mining rigs, etc. Now, because proof of stake requires basically no energy and no expensive equipment, none of the ETH issuance is considered to be a forced seller to pay for expenses. Okay, so this is also considered a supply shock as we remove a significant amount of forced sellers from the market. So the amount of ETH doesn't necessarily change, but when you know that, X amount of ETH is automatically being sold every single month to pay for costs, well, that's a big deal, right? In terms of demand and supply. And so now that's basically just been removed. So now these people who, the stakers who will be earning this ETH and much less of that, but they don't have to sell it. They can just continue to stake it. Okay. Now, some might still sell it. But what we're saying here is that there is a large amount of forced sellers, which is now being removed from the market. Okay. Then we have the staking yield, the APY, to validate Ethereum will increase from about 4% is what it is right now to 9 to 12%. Now, the staking yield is anyone who is staking their ETH, they earn 4% right now, which is basically just the inflation. And then also some from fees from those who use the network. Well, that's going to go up to 9 to 12% because we can pay the miners, or we don't have to pay the miners anymore. We can move some of these transaction fees to go to increase the amount of yield you get when you stake your ETH. And this is a Coinbase estimate that it's going to jump from 4% up to 9 to 12%. Understand that this is a moving target. So the more people who stake, the lower that APY percent goes. The less people who stake, the more that goes up. Okay. So this creates a massive demand shock to ETH because as yield chasers will need to buy ETH in order to stake and receive the APY. So if someone can get 9 or 12%, essentially risk-free on their ETH, that is going to attract a lot of people to stake. And when you stake, it removes ETH off the market. But not just removes off the market, it means there are other people who want to buy ETH to get a 12% APY. So that creates more demand for ETH, okay? And finally, and this one has already happened, so this is not necessarily part of the merge, but something which happened in 2021, and that is EIP 1559. It has burned over $5 billion worth of ETH since its launch in 2021. So while this is already live, so the impact is already being seen, it adds to this sort of supply and demand story for ETH the asset by burning a % of ETH with every transaction that occurs on the blockchain. So what does all this mean? Okay, let's break this down. The 90% reduction in ETH issuance combined with the ETH burn from IP 1559 will turn ETH into a deflationary asset. Okay, so every year there will be less ETH than there was the previous year. There is no other asset in the world that does that. Everything else is growing, including gold, even Bitcoin. There's only 21 million, but there is inflation right now, and there will be for the next like 100 years until that algorithm changes, or not changes, but finishes. So in addition to this deflationary asset, there's more demand will be created via increasing the APY, or the yield, to stake ETH, as well as significantly lowering the barrier of entry to participate in validating Ethereum. You don't need to buy any equipment. And finally, a large % of forced sellers which exist from mining costs will be removed from the market. So what this means is that post-merge, the Ethereum core developers will have created one of the greatest tokenomic structures that we have ever seen in crypto and Web3. And honestly, this could be true for any asset we have ever seen. Okay, the most likely result from this is a sustainable increase in the price and market cap of ETH, and thus a more secure network for Web3 to reside on top of. So when I say sustainable increase, it does not mean that this will just go up only, okay? That's not how this works. There's definitely chances that Ethereum can still go down. It may go down before the merge or after the merge. I don't know. What I'm saying, though, is that they have set up ETH for it to have the best success possible and for it to go up as easy as possible, because the tokenomic structure is in its favor. The people that are selling are now reduced. The people that would want to buy, there's more incentive to buy and hold. So it's basically just kind of changing the economics of it. And that allows for it to go up easier. There's less purchasing that is needed of ETH to make the price go up than there is right now when we have the proof of work, okay? So that is really good news in terms of the security, the underlying technology of basically all of Web3. Finally, the Ethereum Merge births the internet bond. And so you're probably going, WTF, what is an internet bond, Kyle? What are you talking about? And we don't talk a lot about like financial stuff on this podcast. So just bear with me for a second. I know this sounds a bit ridiculous and complicated. I'm going to keep it simple, and hopefully you'll be able to understand why this may be such a big deal. So in the traditional finance world, there is a term which is called the risk-free rate, okay? The risk-free rate is the rate of return of an investment with no risk of loss, okay? So basically, the yield expected from a US Treasury bond. Treasury bonds are debt that is offered by the US government, okay? So the yield expected from a US Treasury bond is the risk-free rate of the United States financial system. And technically, this would be the global financial system too, because basically everyone is buying up US bonds, okay? And the reason this is true is that whether you hold US dollars or you hold US Treasury bonds, there are essentially no additional risks on your assets because they are backed completely by the US government, okay? So should the US government fail, US Treasury bonds could go to zero, absolutely. But so too would the US dollar. So there was essentially no added risk to holding US Treasury bonds over just holding US dollars itself. Now I say essentially because there is never no risk, but it's basically no risk. So they call it the risk-free rate. And this is important because banks and financial services have sort of a baseline rate they can earn, right? Because if they have any cash, they can just put it in there and they earn whatever the yield is. You know, it's low, but it's something. Or they can use that as a revenue stream that they can share to others who are, you know, banks do this where you put your money in their savings account and they will put it into US Treasury bonds, and then they'll give some of that yield to you and they will take some of it as well, okay? So it allows for many financial services to be built on top of, and a place for trillions of dollars to be parked, right? They just sit there and they earn their yield. It also serves as a benchmark, as any yield higher than the risk-free rate has some sort of added risk to it. So, you know, if you are now taking a loan and or you're, you know, giving your assets and you're earning 6%, well, you know, there's some underlying risk there. You might not know what it is in the centralized world, but you know, there's something more than the risk-free rate, because the risk-free rate is 1% or whatever it is. I don't know. Okay. So what's happening here is ETH is about to create the risk-free rate of Web3. So with the transition to proof of stake, you can now earn a risk-free rate on your ETH. Those who choose to validate the Ethereum network by staking their ETH can earn a yield of, let's say, 4 to 12%, right? This just depends on how many people will stake. Now, this yield, so long as you don't use lending platforms or dApps to stake, is essentially risk-free. Okay, so you don't use things like Celsius or Coinbase or Voyager or whatever. We know that those are not risk-free, of course. So in the same scenario as the USD and US Treasury bonds, holding ETH or staking your ETH to earn yield has essentially the exact same risk, right? Because if something happens to Ethereum, the network, and it breaks or whatever, I mean, ETH goes to zero, right? So does your yield. So there is no difference, right? The only difference is you get to earn some yield if you're staking it. So this provides a baseline yield for all of DeFi to be built on top of and utilized, okay? So while this doesn't seem like a big deal to most of us, it's important to understand that institutions, banks, and even governments love yield, especially yield that doesn't bring any additional third-party risk. Of course, there is risk in holding ETH, right? But if institutions or governments or banks or whoever want to hold ETH anyway, or want exposure to this new technology, then they can do that plus gain a risk-free yield. And that is something that many, many institutions and governments and banks are looking for, okay? So a new financial system in global economy is being built over the internet. And for the first time, everyone has an opportunity to invest in it and earn a yield from it. This is a big deal for the overall legitimacy of DeFi, of crypto, and of Web3 at large, okay? You can learn more about the internet bond in an article from Bankless. It's linked in the show notes in the newsletter. If you check that out, they have a good, more detailed description for anyone that cares a lot about the financial aspects of this. So the Ethereum Merge is a big deal for Web3. Okay, Web3 is an exciting space which is growing extremely, extremely fast. However, it's important to understand that even the foundational layer of this industry is still being built out and improved upon. Ethereum, as well as other layer one blockchains, are still very new and a work in progress, which is crazy to think about when you consider that blockchain settled over $16 trillion in transactions in 2021. Now, the Ethereum Merge is a huge step in the right direction for this space. You know, in one moment, which appears to be around September 15th to 16th, 2022, the foundational layer of this industry will become a sustainable technology, both in terms of its carbon footprint and its profitability and tokenomic structure as a blockchain, okay? Finally, the Ethereum Merge legitimizes Ethereum and Web3 by completing one of the largest technological feats that this industry has ever seen and providing an internet-native, risk-free rate to the global financial system. As I've been saying in the newsletter all year and on this podcast, don't fade the merge. That's a wrap, friends. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope that this gives you some good insight into what's happening in this space and with this exciting event of the Ethereum Merge happening in about a month's time of the recording of this podcast. Get ready for some fireworks and a lot to happen. Let's hope it goes smooth. We do not know if it will actually work out. There is some risk right now that something could happen in the merge. I tend to be optimistic of this, but we'll see what happens. There's also going to be a lot of FUD. I talked about it on the roll-up August 12th, I believe is when it came out. And near the end of the news roll-up there, go listen to that to learn more about what's happening in this space in terms of miners potentially forking Ethereum to continue the proof of work blockchain. And there's going to be a lot going on there. And so you're going to hear a lot of things. And I just hope that this one helps you kind of understand where this is going. And then again, if you listen to that podcast on the 12th of August, you can understand what you should be doing and what you should not be doing in case things go a little bit crazy in this industry, as they are so known to do. If you like this episode, please do a few things. One, just give this a rating, right? If you're on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, it takes you 2 seconds. You can literally just open up your phone right now and just click the button, give it a 5-star. Feel free to give us a review. Let us know if you liked it on there. If you're on YouTube, just hit subscribe, hit a like. You can comment on YouTube as well. Any of these kind of things really help us to grow because when you like, when you engage, when you do anything on the podcast, on the YouTube, it hits the algorithm. The algorithm likes when people engage. And it also lets us know what's going on. If you like our content, if we can improve our content, etc. We are here to make the best learning experience possible for those in the Web3 space. So again, thank you so much for listening. I'm Kyle Reidhead, and I can't wait to speak to you again on the next episode. Okay, everyone, have a wonderful, wonderful day. All the best. Thank you for listening to Web3 Academy. We hope this helps you along your Web3 journey. And if it does, please share this episode and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. By the way, if you have yet to join the Discord community, you are missing out. This is where all the magic happens. This is where we learn, where we ask questions, where we network. You want to be in there. The link to join is in the description below. And finally, a quick disclaimer. Nothing in this podcast was financial advice. Crypto and Web3 can be risky. You can literally lose it all. In fact, if you invest on account of what we say, you probably will lose it all. So don't do that. In all honesty, the point of this podcast is to remove the noise of markets and price and focus on utility and implementation anyway. So you should not take any of this as financial advice. Thank you, friends, and see you in the next one.